Everybody, thank you for coming. My name is Megan Francis. I'm a guidance counselor at the high school. Some of you I've met before. Welcome. Typically, I will give a presentation on the SATs, but because there's been so many recent changes, we hired in the big guns. So this is Sherry Brash. She's been with Kaplan for many years and was a teacher before that. 20 years. So she is an expert on everything you need to know about the SAT and the PSAT. So if you want to get started.
Thank you very much, Megan. Thank you for inviting me. And okay, let me just take a quick look here. Parents and students, junior parents and students, if you are. Sophomore?
Carter
There were a
Trafton,
few
please report to
sophomores.
room 1065. Carter Trafton to room 1065. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just, you can clear. Thanks, Gus. Appreciate it. My colleague, Chris Cadet. So today we're going to try to quickly talk about these things, and we're going to talk about why admission tests even matter, and we're going to go over some test essentials, that would be the important things, and then a little tiny bit about the PSAT. How anybody here not able to get their PSAT scores? Okay, talk to guidance about how to access those online. So why are we bothering with these standardized tests? Why aren't your child's grades enough? Well, for some colleges they are. There are test optional schools, but the majority of colleges require standardized tests. And one of the reasons is that's another way of giving scholarships. There are scholarships connected with standardized tests. And 90% of all colleges actually want standardized tests. And in addition, this is the part I don't really like. I have recently heard about employers asking how students did on standardized tests. I used to tell students, you know, once you're done taking your SATs or ACTs, nobody will ever ask you again once you get into college how you did on those tests. Now I've been proven wrong. I hope this is not a growing trend. So, in addition, colleges are looking for a common denominator. They want to see your scores on standardized tests because, especially when they go by numbers, because they've got lots and lots of people applying to the school, it becomes difficult for them just to judge students on their grade point average, which is still the most important factor in admissions, and the rest of the things on the student's resume. So that's why they want standardized tests. So we're going to talk about the current SAT just to compare it to the new SAT and the ACT. So the last administration of the current SAT is January 23rd. And so it soon will become the old SAT. And the new SAT, the first administration, starts in March, and it will then be the SAT, and the ACT, equally strong. So if you look at the division, and there was a pink sheet of paper that showed a difference between the current SAT and the new SAT, and you're welcome to take that. The current SAT had 10 sections, and it had, the first thing you did when you walked in the room was you wrote an essay. Anybody here take what's called the current SAT? Any students? You took it, okay. So when you walked in, the first thing you did was you wrote an essay. Then you had 2 writing sections, 3 critical reading, 3 math, and an experimental section. And these were all short sections, 25, 30-minute sections. And the essay, as I said, was the first thing you did when you walked in. On the new SAT, the test is completely changing. This is the biggest change to this exam that I've seen in the 20 years I've been with Kaplan, and I think that's actually ever happened. So now the test is divided into evidence-based reading and writing and math. In the evidence-based reading, there's a separate reading section, and then the evidence-based writing and language is a sub-part of that test. There's math with no calculator and math with a calculator. The essay is now optional, and it's at the end of the test. Why would you do the essay? It all depends on whether or not a college you're applying to requires it. So it's up to students to figure out which colleges require the essay and which don't. And you do that by going to the college's websites. As a junior, when you tend to take these tests, you don't know what colleges you may be applying to. So some people may want to hedge their bets and make sure that at least one administration of the test that they're taking includes an essay. The ACT also has its essay optional at the end, and that's always been the case. And there are 4 sections on the ACT. There's English, which is equivalent to the writing and language on the SAT. There's math. There's reading, which is equivalent to the evidence-based reading portion. And there's science. That's unique on the ACT. The science section is really a reading section with data interpretation. So the science section of the ACT does not require somebody to have extensive scientific knowledge. Any scientific knowledge you need, they'll give you. But the student has to be a good reader and comfortable with scientific process and data, interpreting charts and graphs. On the SAT, they're going to intersperse some of that into the evidence-based reading and writing and also the math. So there are science questions on the SAT as well. I'm going to try to have you save your questions for the very end, okay? So the scoring. On the current SAT, the highest score you can get is 2,400. By putting your name down on the paper, you get 600 points. And there are 800 points for each section. There were 3 sections: math, critical reading, and writing. And you get 800 points for each of those. If you get an answer right on the current test, you get 1 point. If you get an answer wrong, you get 1/4 point off. That's what's always been called the guessing penalty. On the new SAT, the scoring is very different. It's 400 to 1,600 points in total, going back to what some parents may remember as a 1,600 high score from when you might have taken the test. 800 points for each section, 800 for the evidence-based reading and writing, and 800 for the math. And then you have the optional essay at the end scored separately. The score is not incorporated into any other part of your score. But another big difference is there's no longer a guessing penalty. So nothing is taken off for a wrong answer. Oh, sorry. For the ACT, they have a very different scoring. Their scoring is 1 to 36 points for each section of the test, and then for their composite at the end. So rather than giving a total of the 800 points for each section as the SAT does, on the ACT, you get 1 to 30 points on each of those 4 sections I mentioned. Then they total them up and divide them by 4 for your composite score. Their essay is also scored separately now and not incorporated in their test. They've made a few little adjustments to their test as well in some of the scoring and in the length of time for their essay. They have never had a wrong answer penalty. So if there's no wrong answer penalty, everybody, should you guess, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. You should guess on anything you're not sure of, or save a drop of time at the end and quickly, frantically fill in the blanks and the bubbles for anything you can't finish, because then at least maybe you'll get something. No penalty for a wrong answer. Important strategy. So the SAT isn't just having that up to 1,600 point score. They are having 2 area scores that will equal that 1,600. The area scores are for math and evidence-based reading and writing. And you get 200 points for each section just for putting your name on the page. But then they have something called test scores and cross-test scores. And you're going to see some of this on your results when you get your paper results at the end of January for the PSAT. So there are 3 separate test scores. 1 for math, 1 for reading, and 1 for writing and language. There will then be cross-test scores. What does that mean? Well, there might be science questions in the evidence-based reading and writing, and there might be science questions in the math. And they'll pull those scores together and say those are your cross-test scores for those areas and for history and social studies. And the range of scores is 10 to 40 points for these. So you'll see these different scores on your results. We're not sure how colleges are going to use these scores. The colleges I've spoken to have said that once there are percentiles available, and there aren't yet, then they might look more heavily at these other scores. So what about the timing? Well, we all know that these are kind of an ordeal to take and to sit through. The current SAT, 3 hours and 45 minutes, and that includes the essay, which is mandatory at the beginning. The new SAT is 3 hours without the essay. That the essay is 50 minutes, and that's at the end. Because not only is the essay just an essay, but you have to read a passage that's about 600 to 750 words, and often is from source material. Source material means original material, not necessarily literature, but something from history. They gave, as an example, a speech written by the late Representative Barbara Jordan from Texas at the 1968 presidential nominating convention in Chicago. So that's the kind of source material you'd have to read and then make a case as to how the author makes his or her case. And the ACT is 2 hours and 55 minutes without the essay. They just added 5 minutes to their essay to make it 5 minutes longer, so it's now 40 minutes long. So that's the timing on the 3 tests. So what about other administration details? So we know about the essay, 5 multiple choice answers on each question on the current SAT. On the new SAT, there are only 4 multiple choice answers. The College Board said that they statistically can get what they need by only having 4 multiple choice answers. There is also a section in the math, in both the current and the new SAT, that we call grid-ins. There are no answers provided for this section. It is a section where students have to produce their own answer. So we call it a grid-in because you have to grid in or bubble in the right answer choice. So not only do you have to figure out the answer, but you have to figure out how to represent it correctly. Those of you who've taken a PSAT or an SAT, whether it's the old test or the new test, have experienced the grid-ins. And the grid-ins have long directions, more than half a page. So on test day, how many parents think that students should carefully read all directions? And how many students think they should do that? Raise your hand if you think you should read directions carefully. You don't think so?
You can get it before you take the test.
Exactly right. You don't want to take time on test day. I don't want you to read the directions on test day. I want you to be ready with these directions. They're out there now. You can at least know the directions and not take precious time from figuring out answers by knowing all the directions before. That's true for the SAT and that's true for the ACT. Prepare. Don't go in without preparation. Know what to expect. The ACT has all multiple choice answers for all its questions except the essay, and they have 4 multiple choice answers for everything except math. In math, they have 5. So that's a big difference. So let's look more closely at the evidence-based reading and writing and see what the difference is. So evidence-based means that it's not just find the answer to where someone lived in the passage or something. It's using what the words are in that passage to figure out what the answer is. In the reading section, there are no longer sentence completions. That was actually my favorite part of the current SAT. Sentence completions in the current SAT had 1 or 2 blanks, and that's where you saw the vocabulary words that everybody was frantically checking and testing, what we called SAT vocabulary. That's being eliminated. There's no longer SAT vocabulary. You do not have to sit and memorize vocabulary words. The way they're testing that now is in context. So they've eliminated that. Passages will now focus much more heavily on U.S. and world history, history and social studies, and the sciences, and the passages will be longer. After we gave a practice PSAT in the fall, and in a survey we did, students were complaining about the extensive amount of reading on these tests. And the language and writing section also now will have a lot more words. There'll be longer passages, not short sentences and paragraphs. The writing and language section is really editing. It's grammar. It's equivalent to the English section on the ACT. So math. Math now is really concentrating on the heart of algebra. The heart of algebra means algebra 1 and 2. And that's the biggest part of the SAT. Those of you who took an SAT, those of you who took a PSAT will have noticed that there's more algebra. They've left off the more difficult questions on the PSAT, but that's the passport to advanced math questions. That will be things that you would find more in pre-calculus. Not calculus, but pre-calc. Some trigonometry questions and so forth. Another big change is the 25-minute section that you're not allowed to use a calculator for. They've never had this. The ACT doesn't have this. They have always allowed students to use a calculator for the entire test. But now they've eliminated the use of a calculator on one section of the math. The other section, the 55 minutes, can be done with a calculator. An important tip for the test is to always have a calculator you know how to use when you go to the test. You don't want to be fooling around with something you're not familiar with. You also want to have fresh batteries in your calculator. And sharpened pencils, a lot of them, because you don't know if there's going to be a sharpener in the room you're in. You want to be prepared no matter what. And tissues, they help. So the grid-in that I mentioned on the new SAT will now have something that doesn't exist, obviously, on the ACT. It will be a two-part question. You have to know your answer, you have to have gotten your answer right on part 1 to then be correct on part 2. So that's a new addition as well in math. Sorry, I'm kind of rushing through this. So what's being tested in reading? You can see that the science section is the most in ACT, and that's obvious because they have a separate science section. But you can also see that they've increased the amount of science reading on the new SAT. So it was pretty even on the current SAT, the distribution of what the reading passages were like. Now you can see there are fewer humanities passages to read and far fewer literature. This says literature. And there's more history, more science, and there's a new section called careers. That means it's a reading passage about somebody's profession, but it's reading. And then you can see that the ACT with its separate science section exceeds all that, and it's pretty even in its distribution of the other areas. The ACT has changed very little. What you may start to notice is that the SAT has become more like the ACT. So in the reading, the skills being tested is reading comprehension. That's the most important skill. Then you have words and context that's actually decreased a tiny bit. And but is more than on the ACT. You had SAT words that I mentioned are now eliminated. You have more evidence-based reading, and that was what was extensively being tested on the ACT. The math skills, algebra has increased. Data analysis and problem solving, this was recently added to the ACT. That's their big change. They added more of that. But you can see there's much more of that on the SAT. And then this says geometry. Far less geometry than there was previously. Some geometry teachers I know are bemoaning this fact. And then they've added trigonometry to the SAT, and there were existing trigonometry questions on the ACT. And something they've eliminated is this numbers and operations as its own separate type of thing evaluated. It's now part of other questions, not its own evaluation. So if you looked at skills reported for the PSAT, for instance, they won't list that as a separate category. So when is all this happening? Well, originally you were supposed to be able to access your PSAT scores in December. They moved that to this past week, January 7th. The digital scores were available online. Hard copies will come out, they say, January 29th. Hopefully that will be the case. And then the last administration of the current SAT is on January 23rd. The February ACT is still when it always was. The new SAT is going to be the first Saturday in March, March 5th. So that's much earlier than they've ever had it before. Still have the April ACT. Scores will not be back on the new SAT taken in March until the May exam. So normally you were able to get back your results from an SAT within 3 weeks of the test. Now they're saying it's 3 weeks plus another month. So that's because this is their first administration. They know there are going to be some delays. They need to work on percentiles. They need to see results from March and even the May exam to give percentiles accurately. So there is that delay. After that, there should not be the delay. So when are these tests given every year? Students frequently take a spring administration of the SAT or the ACT in their junior year. If they take it early enough, and this year it's all very skewed, they could take a second administration of the test before the end of the school year, junior year. If they did that, then they're probably done. But for students who have taken a spring administration, there is the fall administration to also take. So the SAT is not only given in January, March, May, and June, but it's also given in October, November, and December. The ACT is given in February, March, April, June, September, October, and December. So we're running out of time. I just want to quickly tell you the difference between the PSAT that you took and the SAT. So the PSAT is 15 minutes shorter. It's got the same areas being tested, but the sections are shorter. One of the big differences now on the new SAT that's very consistent with the ACT is that sections are now much longer. So if you're having an evidence-based reading and writing section, it's reading and writing all at once, not broken up. It's 65 minutes all at once. The math is all at once. Previously it was broken up. The ACT is all at once as well. There's still no guessing penalty, but the score range is different. For those of you who got your scores back already, remember, the highest score anyone can get on the PSAT is 1,520 points. So what does that mean? It means that the hardest questions are not being asked on the PSAT. And if your score range were to be lined up with the SAT, it would fall in a similar area, but you just wouldn't be able to get the best and highest score that you can get on your SAT. So if you get a 1250 on your PSAT, then if you had been taking an SAT that same day without the hardest questions, you probably would have gotten a 1250. Obviously, we hope you will prepare. Kaplan does offer classes right here at North Andover High and at Merrimack College. And if you go to our website, kaplanatschool.com/North Andover, you will see how you can take at no charge our on-demand program because of our partnership with North Andover Community Ed. So this is free for you. There will be a box on the top right on that web page that you can go to, and it will send you to the codes available for SAT or ACT on-demand free. Right now to January 14th, we're having a promotion of up to $150 off classroom and $350 off tutoring. One-on-one in-home tutoring. So, there's my information. If you have questions you want to ask me, please feel right to write it down and send me an email. That's usually the best way to reach me. I have time to take a couple of questions. Yes?
Why would a student take the March versus the June or wait till fall?
Timing for that student personally. What kind of sports do you participate in? Or are you in a play? Or what's your schedule like? That would really determine when you'd want to take the actual exam. To fit into your schedule so that you have time to prepare before. So, you know, you should figure that whatever you do to prepare, and of course I'd love it to be with Kaplan, but whatever you do to prepare, you want to give yourself a number of weeks to do that preparation. And when do you have time? That's how it works. You want to take it in the spring of junior year at least, and then if you need to take it again, but nothing says you have to, you take it in the fall.
So if they take, if they take the essay, which is optional, do they have to submit the essay score to the colleges?
Yes. The
If they
essay
take it.
will go with that test administration. But the one thing to remember is colleges want you to succeed. They want to put your best score on the front of your folder. They see all your scores, but they want to put your best score on the front of your folder. There is score choice. It's an ordeal. North Andover does not, I don't recommend it. North Andover doesn't recommend it. It's too confusing. So you can take the SAT and you can take the ACT and only send either just SAT scores or just ACT scores. But if you take the SAT, they will see all your administrations of the test.
I've talked to many college admissions counselors in the past 12 years, and no one has ever said that they look at the low scores. They only
No,
look
no,
at
what
your
I
top
meant
scores.
is if he does the essay.
Yes,
I
they'll
don't
see
want
it.
to send the essay score.
They will see it, but if it will not help him, they will not use
Right.
it.
Okay,
If the school says we don't care about the essay, they won't really look at it.
Yeah.
okay.
Who
Yes.
gets the highest score?
Mm-hmm.
If they crush it the first time, you just not have to take it again?
Plan, right?
If you've already taken the SATs and then you take the UST or the ACT, will you send in the scores from the UST and the ACT in addition to the old SAT scores?
If you take the ACT and the new or the current SAT, you don't have to send all of those. You can just send SAT and no ACT, but then your new SAT and current SAT would go, or you can just send the ACT. You don't have to send them both. But remember, your counselors, it's not on your transcript. You have to pay to send them if you wait. And it is in your interest to wait and see if you're going to take both. You don't want to, in your junior year, when you're not sure where you're applying, do that.
Good evening.
Up.
It is now time to move to your next
You
information
find out
session.
from the school.
For those who are interested in
No schools are equal.
in room 10.
And there's charts online too that will tell